In France, a newly emergent way of thinking about human identity was led by a group of thinkers and writers who called themselves Philosophes. These people were basically publicists who were advocating change. They facilitated a process that has since been known as the Enlightenment, and that's what we're going to discuss here for a little bit, which involved both formulating, and disseminating for relatively wide consumption a body of thought that introduced the possibility of willful individual advancement, willful societal improvement, which at the time was a novel concept. This emergent Enlightenment thinking depended in part upon adoption from England, a new theological position known as Deism. A deistic perspective basically held that God created the world, but was not actively involved in its everyday management, in contrast with the absolutist interpretation. Such work, everyday work, is left to human beings. From this point of view, since human beings were created in God's image, then they're both fundamentally good and, importantly, capable of the faculty of reason, godlike reason. People were perfectible. Society was perfectible. As the cultural historian of French engineering, Ken Alder, put it, quote, "Orthodox natural philosophers of the Enlightenment worshipped at the church of Deism. They could, and they often did, invoke God as the guarantor of nature's lawfulness, and trust that in His benevolence He had shaped human minds so that these truths might be apprehended." End quote. In other words, by applying the faculty of reason, humans could discover the laws of nature. Humans could then use the knowledge of these laws to make society more perfect, to intervene in the workings of society in order to restructure it more in the image of God. The perceived presence of growing disorder in society under the administrations of Louis XV and XVI, and through the emergence of these new classes in a rapidly changing society, combined with the emergence of classes, combined with the institutions that increasingly appeared to be out of date and hence in a way irrational, indicated the scope of the problem. In contrast, as the historian Frederick Artz puts it in introducing readers to the French Enlightenment, quote, "Reason would unlock all the secrets of the universe and would correct the rules for running both society and individual conduct." End quote. The first step involved a commitment to apprehending the laws of nature. In the 17th century, prior to the Philosophes here, Descartes and other philosophers had established the relevance of mathematics as the means, as the tool for gaining access to the laws of nature. For Descartes, nature was a huge mechanism created by God, and through human minds, human beings could apprehend these laws, specifically through the new tool of advanced mathematics. Descartes wrote, I'm quoting, "Above all, I was delighted with mathematics because of the certainty and evidence of their demonstration. I was surprised that upon foundations so solid and so stable, no loftier structure had been raised." In other words, why haven't people turned to mathematics before? End quote. In comparing France with Britain, for example, it's important that Descartes' contemporary, Francis Bacon, was calling attention to the benefits that society could gain from empirical scientific study, rather than from a priori speculation or revelation from biblical texts. Bacon was a monk. As Alder put it, quote, "Bacon raised the expectation that the systematic application of science might substantially influence both technology and the material circumstances of our lives." In other words, science can somehow help us materially. This idea was in contrast with the traditional view that technology developed over time in analogy to nature. Note this point. Traditionally, the view of technology, or at that time, the traditional view, was that technology just somehow developed through some means that we couldn't understand, not something that we could influence directly. End quote. But Bacon, he paid little attention to mathematics. Descartes asserted a separate pathway drawing directly upon mathematics. Descartes asserted, quote, "It is possible to attain knowledge which is useful in life, and instead of the speculative philosophy of the past based upon biblical texts, which is taught in the schools, we may find a practical philosophy by means of which, knowing the force and action of fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all other bodies that environ us, we can employ them in all those uses to which we are adopted, and thus render ourselves the masters and possessors of nature." In other words, through mathematical theory, through the work of the mind, one could apprehend nature and ultimately position humanity in a position of control over nature. Now, Descartes, despite this call for a practical philosophy, which in Germany or in Britain might have suggested searching for order in everyday, hands-on practical activities, the so-called Cartesian philosophers emphasize the use of mathematics to infer and reveal the hidden workings of nature, without recourse not only to everyday practical knowledge, but even to experimentation in a Baconian sense. Mathematics was primary. In a way, Descartes was replacing revelation through the Bible with a kind of revelation through mathematics. Without contesting the importance of mathematics, the Philosophes in the 18th century, after Descartes, worked to extend the site for the application of reason to the useful arts. So they're thinking about making a difference in society through the application of mathematics. The Philosophes, according to Alder, and I'm quoting again, quote, "cast the Cartesians," the followers of Descartes, "with their sterile a priori speculations and penchant for spinning cosmological systems at the drop of a thought." End quote. In other words, they're thinking more in terms of application in useful arts. One strategy used by the Philosophes was to codify knowledge in crafts and other useful arts. Most prominent among these was publication of an encyclopedia by Diderot and d'Alembert in the middle part of the 18th century. The Enlightenment was then a popular movement in the sense that its leaders, including Diderot, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, were speaking beyond the nobility to the new bourgeois classes. It's important to note, however, that the Philosophes were not speaking to commoners who were still largely illiterate. These writers themselves were supported through patronage, mostly through patronage, either from the new bourgeois classes or perhaps sympathetic nobility. They were able to support themselves through the sale of writings, magazines, newspapers, articles, and sometimes books that could be purchased with the money available in the new classes. As popularizers, they offered people a new way of analyzing the present, offering people an ability to criticize inequities, to criticize abuses of power and authority, or any unwanted aspects of traditional authority, whether by the nobility or by the clergy or by the crown. All as, in some sense, irrationalities that could be corrected by the application of reason to human institutions. As Artz summarizes, quote, "Among the first principles of the Philosophes were the following: the only justification for the state is for the promotion of the good life for its citizens." Note the term citizens rather than subjects. Continuing, "Men should be rational. They can conceive the good, can discover means of obtaining it, and should be allowed, if they used reason, to direct their own lives by their knowledge, reason, and experience. The ability to use their reason makes men equal. Laws should accord with popular wishes and should preserve men's rights. And with the use of reason, progress is sure to come. The Philosophes were also optimistic about the chances of reforming everything and of building a better future. No longer would so-called scholastic traditions, which vesting authority in the church and the state, nor the sanctity of revelation prevent the rule of experiment and of reason. End quote. The Philosophes thus created, extended, engendered a popular optimism, a sense of opportunity, that the future could somehow be better than the past. This was news. Now, the critical potential of these ideas was not lost on the nobility. Diderot's works were suppressed, and he was imprisoned. Voltaire was twice imprisoned in the Bastille, and he had to live much of his life in exile. Other books had been condemned. Now, it's important to note, especially for those who understand a little bit about the United States, that the Philosophes advocated reform and they believed in human progress, but they were not calling for democracy. They were not advocating a shift of power to the commoners, to the masses. The Philosophes had no faith that a democratic system somehow built upon the manifestation of mass opinion would successfully achieve the apprehension and the application of reason. Now, certainly as more knowledge was shared more widely, people would become more capable of self-government, but democracy was not a necessary means in this French context for the fulfillment of rationality in order to benefit society. So, by the mid-18th century, we have established a country with a relatively stable and consistent identity, a highly centralized state, and the emergence of a new way of thinking that, while promising practical improvements in society, placed highest priority in apprehending the laws of nature through the application of mathematics. We are now in a position to understand the emergence of engineering at the point of contradiction between a centralized state ruled by a divine right monarch and the popularization of a concept of reason, premised on the possibility of humans organizing themselves around the laws of nature.